I'm not saying that, you know, there is a right way to do this. There isn't. And everybody is going to grieve so differently. We are as unique as our fingerprint on how we will do our grief process. And I facilitate an 8-week program with clients. And in 20 years, I've never seen two people do the program the same.
Yeah.
Like they just don't. And that's okay. And I think that's like part of it is realizing that and allowing yourself to do it your way. Because when we go through grief, it's like you are ripping your heart and soul open. Like you are so exposed and so vulnerable. And it is going to reveal and expose every single part of you. And not just who you've been over the last year.
Mhm.
It's everything.
Unleash the untapped potential within you as we dive fearlessly into the realms of healing, personal growth, self-love, and uncharted territories of the human experience. Join us as we navigate relationships, conquer career and business milestones, and explore the depths of spirituality. This isn't just a podcast, it's a manifesto for the resilient, the ambitious, the soul-searching women and men of today. Grab your coffee and let's dive in with Beyond the Surface.
Welcome back to another episode here on Beyond the Surface. And today we are diving and unpacking grief in the many ways that it comes. And I am so excited to have you here with me, Cheryl. I appreciate you for being here with me and for diving into this conversation with me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And I would love for you to share a little bit more about who you are and what you do, especially in the world around grief. I know you have founded a company and you're an author, and I'd love for you to just share more about who you are.
Sure. Well, I stumbled upon my grief journey in a very tragic way. My 8-year-old daughter Rachel died from complications from a flu virus back in
Wow.
1998. So it's been 25 years since she's gone. And I have taken that tragedy and turned it into inspiration and my purpose in life. Our family came down with the flu virus, and Rachel just wasn't bouncing back, and she had complications, a condition called ITP, where your antibodies attack the platelets instead of the
Mm.
virus itself. And normally the platelets just get down to a low level and then they multiply and recover, and you just have to monitor your platelets from then on in. But in less than 1% chance, you can have a spontaneous bleed, and that can be in any of your organs, and that's also recoverable. However,
Wow.
Rachel's bleed was in her brain, and it didn't present the same way as it would have if it was in her organs.
Mm.
So they performed brain surgery on her, and they were going to remove the front left lobe to release the pressure. But after hours of surgery, they realized that her brain was too swollen and they couldn't save her. And she was pronounced brain dead. And when we were saying our goodbyes, the doctor had asked me if I had considered uh, organ donation. And I said
Mm.
no, but she had. And his mouth dropped and said, "What do you mean she had?" And not a word of a lie, 5 weeks before this all happened, I was reading an article in the Toronto Sunday Sun newspaper about a little boy who had undergone a lung transplant. And she was peeking over my shoulder, and she saw this boy, and he was in a hospital bed, and his arms were extended in victory, and he was all happy. And she said, "That boy looks happy, but it looks like he's in a hospital bed." So I explained to her that he was happy because he got new lungs. And she said, well, what happened to his old lungs? And I explained that he had been sick. And she says, well, where do you get new lungs? And I said, well, unfortunately, somebody died, but they said that they could have their lungs. And so they've been put into this little boy's chest to give him life. And so she went back to playing, and I thought, okay, well, I've thoroughly grossed her out. She was, I thought, well, she's satisfied. Off she goes now. And she started playing, and then about 5 minutes later, she pops her head up and she said, when I die, I want to give my organs so I can save kids. And I thought, oh my gosh, she wasn't grossed out at all. She was just processing that information and came up with that declaration. And I was so proud in that moment. Little did I know, 5 weeks later, I would be drawing on that conversation. So I told the doctor that she had expressed her wishes. And in that moment of like complete powerlessness, I felt like it was the only thing I could do was to fulfill her wishes. So I allowed her organs to be harvested, and her heart went into a 7-year-old little girl who needed a heart transplant. And her lungs were flown down to the States into a 14-year-old girl who had undergone a heart and a lung transplant a few years prior, but she needed new lungs again. So she got Rachel's lungs and her two corneas. So she gave sight to a toddler who had been blinded in surgery and gave sight to a baby who was born blind. So saved 2 lives and gave sight to 2. So
Oh
that
my
was
gosh.
just amazing. And so that was like a bright light and something that definitely led me on a positive track, I would say, in my grief. But it was definitely years of a dark journey. Mike Harris and Don Cherry were putting together the Trillium Gift of Life organization back in 1998, spreading the word that you have to share your wishes about organ donation to your family members and not just sign your license. And so, because Rachel had expressed her wishes, she became a bit of a poster child for organ donation. So I did a lot of public speaking, which was the upside and the positive light. But, I would park my grief at the door and then I would go and speak, and then I'd go home and I would be out for 2 days, just totally overtaken with the grief. And I mean, it was a 4-year journey, and I just couldn't believe the lessons and the transformation that happened for me during that time. And I just knew that this was bigger than me and that it couldn't just be about a mom that's devastated over the loss of her daughter. I just felt like this happened for some kind of bigger reason than I would ever understand, and that I was to do something with it. So for 20 years plus, I have been working with clients to help guide them through their grief process. And I knew when I was speaking at that time that, taking a tragedy and being able to inspire people was powerful. And people would line up to talk to me after. And, there was so many sad stories and so many hurting people out there. And I wasn't in the position then to help them, but I just knew that I wanted to work through my own grief so that when I was on the other side of this, that I could then help others heal. And that's what I do.
Wow. And too, oh my gosh, there's just so much that it just takes.
Yeah, talk about unpacking.
Yeah, there's just it really takes so much courage and strength. I just see strength, right? And it's like
Mm,
sometimes we're kind of in this, I feel like in this place where we're faced with something so challenging, and it's almost as if like there's sometimes nothing else that can be done except do something with
yeah.
that, with that, right? Where we can't control, unfortunately, we can't control death. It's a part of life. We truly can't control it. And so,
Hmm.
I think I've always looked at it, especially experiencing loss at such a young age, and it's such a strange concept when you're young, no matter, like, I think the biggest thing is like, what do you mean? Like, I'm never going to see this person again. It's
Mhm.
so hard to wrap your brain around that. And I
Yeah.
think even still as adults, it can be that where you're just like, this physical body is not here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you believe in like the signs as well, but like then there's these moments where it's like it doesn't feel like we're so far apart. It's, there's just this piece around. We just can't physically see them anymore, but then
Mhm.
we just know that they're still with us too.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's such a strange concept. Um,
Mhm.
but when it, yeah, I just wanted to, I think, really just acknowledge you for the strength that you've had. I can imagine what that's like, losing your 8-year old, and also at the same time being presented with, almost in a sense, this opportunity to say, I know this just happened, and would you like to do this with it? And it
Yeah.
completely unfolds a whole other path for you too.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I get the strength and I get the courage, but only in
Mhm.
hindsight, because I did not feel strong and I did not feel
Of
courageous at the
course.
time. But I get it. Like, I can see it now.
Hmm.
But gosh, I mean, I was so broken, and you're right. Like, these opportunities kept landing in my lap, and I don't even know how I had the foresight to lean into it. I
Mm.
remember at her funeral, this gentleman who played hockey with my brother approached my brother and said, I do a lot of articles for the Sunday Sun. I'd love to interview your sister about the organ donation. And so my brother Wayne approached me about it, and I said, absolutely not. I said, my daughter died. It is not a newspaper story. And
Mm.
so he went back and told Kevin, no, she's a no. She's a hard no. And then a couple days later, I thought, gosh, I made that decision about Rachel's organs because I read a newspaper article in that paper.
Mm.
And I thought, I felt like, how dare I not pay it forward? Like,
Mm.
it didn't even feel like I made a decision. I felt like it was like, how dare I not? And so
Mm.
I approached my brother and I said, you know what, tell Kevin that I will if he's still interested. So Kevin came over and he interviewed me, and his article ended up on the front page of the Sunday Sun with a 2-page spread on page 4 and 5. And I thought it would be some little article in the corner somewhere, but it was a front page article, and it was absolutely amazing. And he won an award for that article. And then
Wow.
from that article, his editor said, this story is so powerful. You need to submit this to the Chicken Soup for the Soul. And so Kevin submitted it, and it was the #1 story chosen for Chicken Soup for the Parent's Soul. And her story is shared on page 287 of that book.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, it just these opportunities just kept landing in front of me. And
Hmm.
then Sick Kids Hospital, where she died, they asked me to come and speak. And so I did several speaking engagements with them, which led to me doing a press conference with Mike Harris and Don Cherry, and another press conference with the mayor of Toronto. And then they asked me to be the national spokesperson for organ donation. I was flown out to Winnipeg to be on a panel on Women's Television Network. There was a documentary written about filmed about Rachel. Like, there was just all these opportunities to share her story, and it was just really inspiring to me. And I
Mm.
mean, I think back and I think, oh my gosh, I was such a zombie back then. I mean, I was on some talk shows and I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I don't remember driving to that place. But
Wow.
but I was just pulled forward through the whole thing. And but I mean, not that there weren't pitfalls and not that there weren't dark days, because there was. And
Hmm.
And those were the things that I really wanted to help others through, because I just don't think that grief is meant to do it alone. And I was so lucky to be surrounded with an amazing support system, and that was so important. But doing my own introspective work and allowing grief to transform who I was as a person was just a miracle.
Mm. And I feel like that's the thing too. How do you are immediately transformed, especially when it's someone that is just so close to you.
Hmm.
Same doesn't even make sense, like
Yeah.
it's, when I did work in an organization in Mississauga, and I spent lots of years, especially after my cousin passed away, and I was doing a lot of work with them. And one of the things that I learned through them was just like this new normal. And
Mm.
honestly, like, there's no other way that I could put that into words. That's exactly what it is. It's a whole
Hmm.
new normal that you move into naturally, right? and
Yeah.
and it seems like too, those pieces, what I was thinking about as you were kind of just talking about how it was like this opportunity, then the next, and it was like, it was just what was like sometimes we just go with what's presented in front of us, and we
Yeah.
don't even need to see all the steps that line
Hmm.
up afterwards. We don't even
Yeah.
know, we need to know the entire why or how it's going to unfold, and it
Yeah.
just does. and
Yeah.
and it's just kind of, you follow the thing that's right in front of you, and just look at the magnitude of her story, her journey, your journey has probably like just impacted so many people.
Mm. Yes.
And all
Yeah.
because, also because you made this choice of her living, like continuing to tell her story. I think that is such a big piece. At least when I think about the healing side of grief, I think of how it would be a shame, and you gave me chills, and I immediately started to get emotional when you said paying it forward. Like,
Mm.
how could you not pay it forward? And sometimes that's what it is, right? Like, I know sometimes after you lose someone who's so close to you, it's so hard some
Yeah.
days to talk about the memories and those moments.
Yeah.
And yet there are things that we learn from the people that we love so dearly, and those things can be something for someone else, and that's what I've always taken with me, especially after my cousin passed away. Like,
Mm.
he passed at the age of 20, so also still
Oh.
very young and tragic and sudden, and
Mm.
yet an example of living your life to the fullest and following your dreams. And
Mm.
it would be such a disservice not to tell people his story, not to tell
Mm.
people his journey, because we could learn so much from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when
Wow.
you said, the new normal, and that is so true, but I remember resisting that new normal
Yeah.
because I did not want a new normal. I just wanted everything to go back to the way it was.
Of course.
Even though she wasn't here, I just always had this analogy of like a mirror shattering into a bunch of pieces and me frantically trying to put the mirror back together and all the pieces that were shattered and trying to make a mirror out of it. And after Rachel died December 2nd, and we got through Christmas and we got through New Year's, and then I got Sean back to school, and then I showed up at the office and everyone's like, Cheryl, what are you doing here? And I just thought, well, this is what you do. Like, you just have to carry on. And they were like, Cheryl, go home. So I went home because I couldn't even fathom the journey
Mm.
that I was about to go through around the grief. Like, clearly I was still in denial. Um, and thinking that, you just go to work and carry on. And it is so not that.
Mm.
It really is, like you say, unpacking all the emotions and all the what ifs and could haves and would haves and all of that. it's such a process.
Yeah.
Such a process.
Do you think for some people that the going back into work, I don't know why like the word healthy comes to mind, but and we all have to find this for ourselves of what it looks
Yes.
like to
Hmm.
grieve in a healthy way. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, what has that journey been like for you? What really served you in that moment? Because you obviously attempted to go right back to work. What did that look
Hmm.
like then going home too, right? Because I could also then just imagine you're sitting at home and all you can think about is that as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it consumed my thoughts
Yeah.
completely. And, going back to work didn't work for me, but, it can, I'm not saying that, you know, there is a right way to do this.
Mhm.
There isn't. And everybody is going to grieve so differently. We are as unique as our fingerprint on
Mhm.
how we will do our grief process. And I facilitate an 8-week program with clients. And in 20 years, I've never seen two people do the program the same. Like,
Yeah.
they just don't. And that's okay. And I think that's like part of it is realizing that and allowing yourself to do it your way. Because when we go through grief, it's like you are ripping your heart and soul open. Like you are so exposed and so vulnerable. And it is going to reveal and expose every single part of you, and not just who you've been over the last year.
Mhm.
It's everything. It's bringing your values together, your beliefs together, your religion, your community, your conversations that you've had historically with your family, inherited conversations, your culture, your personality, um, everything. You are bringing it all into this process.
Mhm.
So realizing that everybody has, all different shapes and sizes of all of those things, plus the relationship you had with that person. you
Mhm.
know it can be two people grieving the same person that passed away, but they grieve it completely differently because it's a different relationship, it's a different impact. It's so complex, and that's why I find grief so interesting.
Yeah.
And that's why it inspires me so much working with people and being able to witness their journeys. And
Mhm.
it's just so beautiful. And when you say healthy, um, it is subjective. It's like, what is healthy for you? Like, I mean, I remember my grief counselor saying to me, because I was thinking about going to a psychic, and I was like, "Do you think I should do this?" She goes, "Cheryl, anything short of heroin, do it." You know? So I was like, "Okay." um, so like any abuse of anything is not healthy,
Yeah.
but we're going to do what we need to do to cope.
Mm.
And I would just say that as long as it's not hurting anybody or hurting yourself, there are many, many ways to grieve in a healthy way.
Yeah. What I'm curious about too is because you said it's been 20 or 25 years. I'm really bad at math.
25
I know you
years.
said it was 98.
25.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
what has that, I can only imagine as well, the grief has looked so differently. I don't want to say, like, for lack of better words, decades, but um,
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, what has it looked like? What has grieving looked like then? And what does grieving for you look like now? Because I don't think we ever stop
Mm.
grieving the loss of
No.
someone in our lives. So how has that looked? How has that journey been for you as well? How has that looked differently,
Mm.
if it has?
Yeah. Oh, it definitely has. It has taken so many shapes and so many twists and turns. And I call the first 4 years were my acute stages of grief. And I remember somebody telling me, with a major loss like this, it's going to take 7 years to recover. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I will never survive 7 years of this pain. Like, there's no way I can endure that. And so I was like a dog with a bone, trying to get as much as I could so that I wouldn't last 7 years. But I remember at the 4-year point putting my head up and saying, I think I'm going to survive this. And the people around me saying, we always knew you would. And I said, I didn't. Like, I really didn't. Like, it's like you described, you just do the next logical thing. And that's how I lived. I was kind of in survival mode. And, but then after the 4-year mark, when I could actually integrate the grief into my life and move forward, then the grief then kind of just tucked itself into my heart, and it just has a place that I get to hold it. And if I was to rush through that grief, grief is very patient. And so if I took the case that, I'll just stay busy, and I'll just go back to work and I'll just, carry on. Grief is okay with that. And it'll just sit on the sidelines and wait for you. and then it will come and hit you square in the face. So it's, it doesn't go anywhere. And, but, if you allow it to, if you lean into it and you allow the pain to kind of take over you and process those emotions, then it can find a place in your heart and just be tucked away there. And it's not like it doesn't hurt, but the pain doesn't run the show. That's what I noticed. Not that I can't, shed a tear if I'm triggered about something, or, we have an event and I wish that Rachel was a part of it, or, we hit a milestone, or like, just, it's funny. I'm seeing the pictures of my kids up on my cabinet here. And, it's Rachel when she was 8. And the other frame is my son, Sean, who was 6 when she died. And every year he would, like, it was almost ceremonial, and this ritual of changing the school picture every year, it was like, oh, now I'm Rachel's age. And then when he was 9, it was like, oh, now I'm older than her. And then, the years passed, and it was like, wow, she's been gone, longer than, I've lived longer than was here, kind of thing, right? Like, always doing the math around those years. And when he was home at Christmas time, he was showing a friend the pictures and all his school pictures. And he pulled out the one when he was 6, the same age he was when she died, and he put that picture in there. So now when I walk by the pictures, it's like, it's him at the age when she died. And that brought a tear to my eye at Christmas time when he did that. It was meaningful to him and I, and so those things still are very emotional, but the pain just doesn't run the show. And I'm grateful for that. And you mentioned too about, that they're not very far away. And I remember having a conversation with a girlfriend when her daughter got to be, I don't know whether she was 19 at the time or something, and she was commenting on how the relationship changes as they age. And I said, oh, I'm so jealous. I said, I didn't get to experience that with Rachel. And she said, are you sure? And I just stopped on my tracks and I thought, wait a minute. And then I thought about it and I thought, no, she's right. My relationship has changed with Rachel over the years, not from an age perspective, but it doesn't mean that my grief has not taken a path, and that my relationship with her has not changed over the years,
Mm.
because it has.
Yeah, I guess it's because we're not seeing it physically right in front of us, right? But when you
Right.
can
Mm-hmm.
sit with it, of course, yeah, the relationship
Mm-hmm.
changes. Of course it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And yeah, it's interesting how I think the piece around I've never heard someone say so beautifully and gently about grief. It's patient. Like, yep, that's another way of saying one day it'll hit you. One day it
Yeah.
comes. One day it comes.
Well, and that's the thing, like, grief is actually kind, and you could not have convinced me that in the early
Mm,
stages when I was in it, like, just absorbed in it and consumed by it. No, it's like it felt cruel, and it felt unkind, and it felt just like
yeah,
terrible.
yeah.
But I realize now how grief is kind. And the one way it's kind is because it slows us down.
Hmm.
And the other way it's kind is because it helps us get clarity on priorities.
Hmm.
And I remember, when you're in that fog when you first lose somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't get, like you said, you can't get your head around it. And that's because our brains can't actually absorb all that information
Yeah,
at once. It actually would take us out.
that's true.
So that's why denial is just so kind. It's like our brains, like, just slowly, taking that information in. It's like it only lets it in little pieces so that we can absorb it at our own speed.
Mm,
And so that's another way it's kind. Like, it actually is very, very kind
yeah,
if we allow it. And, the pain is in the resistance. That's where the pain
yes.
lives. The more I resisted, and that's why it's like I just resisted this new normal. It's like, no. Like, I made a decision when I drove away from the hospital that day. I said, I will survive this, but
Mm-hmm.
I will never let this be okay. And
Yeah,
that was a declaration.
yeah,
And then, I just kept living into that.
yeah.
And that's where the resistance lived. That's where all the pain lived. But when I actually accepted the grief, and I, like, leaned into it, and I allowed it to take me out,
Yeah.
so to speak, that's when the healing can begin. And
Mhm.
that's when the pain can actually subside.
Yeah. And how true is that piece to every, not just necessarily when we feel grief, but when we
Hmm.
feel any sort of resistance in any area of our lives, anytime, like that's where it's coming from, is it's resistance is what is
Yeah.
creating that pain for us, because
Hmm.
we're afraid, we're afraid to lean in, we're afraid to open
Yeah.
ourselves up to that. Sometimes it's we're afraid to have those conversations that need to be had.
Yeah.
All of it is part of it too.
Yeah.
Have I'm curious too, has your the way that you've navigated your journey with grief, has it surprised anyone? Has it kind of, like, in a sense, made people feel uncomfortable? I don't know why that question is coming up, but I'm just curious too, because I think sometimes it's like this perspective, like when you can come in with, and not that you had it right away too, but just, sometimes having this perspective is not always agreed with everyone. Sometimes I feel like I've noticed, people really live in that pain, and they live in the sadness, and on the other side of that sadness too is some really beautiful pieces that we can learn from and take from. So yeah, I'm just curious if that's, how has that been received from other people?
Yeah. I've only come up against it a couple of times,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not to say that it's not out there. But maybe because of the way I approach it, they're not comfortable talking to me about any other way, perhaps, because the approach I took, because like, okay, let me back up. So when I was in the acute stages of grief and I was deciding to live because I didn't want to, and I actually had a plan in place that I was going to take my own life because I just knew that I couldn't endure the pain. But when I decided to live, I negotiated with God that it was like, if I'm going to stick around, then this has to be about more than me paying the mortgage and raising my son. Because if that's what my life is going to be about, I'm out. So if I'm sticking around, you better make it bigger than me and bigger than a mortgage and bigger than my son. So my approach was that I was going to be purposeful and I was going to have a great life. And I was going to be able to move forward, and this grief was not going to be the name of the game, so to speak. So I remember approaching an organization about going in and leading a workshop about grief. And they read something on my website, and I had said something about getting complete with the pain. And they said, well, I don't think you're a fit for this organization because to us, grief never ends. And the idea that you could ever be complete with the pain is not a match for what we support our clients with. And I thought, oh, wow, because I'm not willing to sit in it for the rest of my life. I just wasn't. Like, it's like, okay, all the power to you. I remember going to an organization. I don't want to name the organization because I know they do good work, but I remember going, and it was a bunch of women that were very sour and very bitter. And I remember it was February. We made Valentine's cards, and Rachel had been only gone for a couple months. And somebody asked me, "Have you cooked yet, dear?" And I was like, "What? What do you mean, cooked what?" And it was like, "Well, like, have you cooked dinner?" And I was like, "Yeah, every night." I was like, what do you mean?" And they said that they ate takeout for like 6-8 months. And I was like, okay, well, I have a son to feed. It's like I can't afford takeout every night. Yes, I cook. And then they talked about how if they had to look at another lasagna, they were, gonna, just go ballistic because of all these people dropping off lasagnas. And I thought, how ungrateful. Like, people are like reaching out to support you, and you're sitting here complaining about lasagna. And I just thought, wow, like I just didn't want to become one of these people. And I just thought, like, that was a real deciding factor. It was like, no, I'm going to do what I need to do to work through my grief, and I'm going to have a great life, or else I'm checking out. Like, I just, and I did have one client that resisted, actually doing the letting go process because she wanted to hang on to it. And out of 20 years, only one client, and that's her choice. That's okay. And she actually led support groups that was part of that organization where they sat around and complained about lasagna and ate takeout.
They find their
So
people.
I don't know.
They find their people.
They find their people. Yeah. But and that's okay. But I don't think a lot of them probably express that to me. If they do think that my approach is, not their cup of tea.
Yeah. I want to say too, just like it makes me emotional too. So I'm going to try and get through this, but like, thank you too for making that choice, because I also can't imagine. And I'm sure in this moment too, you looking back, the amount of people that you've impacted through the work that you do, but
Mm.
It's also just an honor being here because of the choice that you made so many years ago
Mm.
to say, if I'm doing this, like that deal you made, I know you bring it in such light, beautiful humor and fun to it too. But I also just see that, I just see the privilege and the honor of it to be in this moment, to be able to have that conversation, to be in this conversation, to have
Mm.
crossed paths with you because of that
Mm.
choice that you made so many years ago. And I just wanted
Oh,
to
thank
say that to
you.
you. It's just, suicide is, I've, I've had someone in my life do that. And it's also just a huge piece. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just, it's something that we don't talk about enough,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
part of just also grief is that too, like,
Yeah.
especially I've always looked at, parents, especially when they lose their kids so young, it's like, this is not the way things are supposed to be. And I just, that weight and the heaviness that comes with that too. And that's why I feel like I know in the moment, like you said, in hindsight, it's so much strength, and that choice is so powerful of you to make. And I'm also curious too if you can shed light on that letting go piece that you kind of talked about, that, that one
Mm.
client who wasn't willing to let go. What is, I also want to, because I'm curious about your approach to that. What does that look like for you
Mm.
in grief and the letting go piece? Because I'm sure for people, it's making that connection of like, well, how can I ever let go of this person? This person, I can never
Right.
let go of that person. So how did you
Right.
how do you come there? How do you land there? What does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely has to be a soft approach, for sure, because letting go is like such a cliche, right? And so you don't just like, "Oh, okay, well, you're going to work with me and we're going to let it go." It's like, okay, one, two, three, let
Yeah.
it go. No, it's a process, right? And Rachel and Sean's dad, 10 years after Rachel died, he took his own life
Hmm.
and died by suicide. And so, I think, and not that every person is going to end up in that situation, but for me, it's an example that he was not willing to let go.
Yeah.
And I think it's one it can be one impact
Yeah.
to not letting go, like because the grief can consume you,
Yeah.
it really can. um so yeah, I take a soft approach, and it's like an 8-week course, right? So we're only letting go at like week 6, 7, or no, not even 6, like week 7, 8, we're introducing the idea of letting go. and and you're right, like people imagine that letting go is letting go of the person.
Yeah.
And I don't mean letting go of the person. I mean letting go of the
The
pain.
pain.
And part of that is taking responsibility for your grief and not taking responsibility for the person dying or any other circumstance that you're grieving. It's taking responsibility for your response to the grief.
Mm.
That you can own.
Yes.
And once you are willing to own that, then the next step is to let go of the pain, because now you're in the driver's seat of managing and navigating your grief. So once you're in the driver's seat, you can let go of the pain. And it's a choice, just like it was a choice to live, or
Hmm.
it's a choice to die and check out. You know, we are making choices all the time. So, and people are mostly afraid of that letting go piece because they think that they're number one going to let it be okay that they died. Like that was
Yeah.
my thing. It was like, no, I was not never going to let this be okay. So I can't let go. Um, they're afraid that it will mean something, like that they don't love them as much
Mm.
as they should, or that people will judge if they're happy in their life now,
Yeah.
that they didn't care. And they think that, when you are in that grief, you do feel really close to that person. Like you're really attached because the grief is just so consuming, and they're afraid that they'll lose their connection with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that was me too.
Yeah.
Like I was like so enveloped like with Rachel in my
Mm-hmm.
grief, and I was afraid of letting that go. But it actually was the opposite.
Mm.
So once I was willing to let go, that opened up my heart, and there was room for her to be in my heart.
Yeah.
Where before, just holding it in, I didn't have room for anything else. But once you let go, you open that space, and then there's room for them, and there's room for all of it. And then there's room for joy and love to come in. So, introducing what's possible
Yeah.
by the letting go, and negating what you are making the letting go mean.
Mm.
So we got to get rid of that, the myth of it all, and then create possibility.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm like sitting here even just reflecting too on, the sometimes guilt, I guess, in a way that comes up for me, just when I lose someone, it's also I navigate it differently than what I did when I first lost my cousin, or, even when I lost my grandmother, who was, like a second mom to me. And I also just like every loss is just navigated also differently. I guess in a way
Hmm.
I feel a sense of comfort with grief, and I think I trust myself in my own process of grief. But
Mm.
when I see people in the pain, not that there's judgment coming from my end on them, it's actually the opposite. It's actually, when I'm not in that space, I almost feel guilty. I almost feel guilty that, I forget an anniversary, and I kind of come across and I'm like,
Mm.
oh my God, yeah, today would have been, or this week would have been, X amount of years. And sometimes it just,
Mm.
I forget. And it's not,
Mm.
I guess I made that choice where it wasn't going to consume me, and I was going to let go of, the heaviness and the weight, and that it wasn't going to consume my everyday. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think just in that, I'm just like reflecting on like, that's also okay too. And it doesn't
Mm.
change. It doesn't mean that I love them
Yeah.
less. It doesn't mean that I care less. It's just my process. And I don't think it's coming from a
Mhm.
place of not trying to feel it. I feel like my outlook with grief and losing people is, although they're not here physically, we're somehow still walking a path together. Is
Yeah.
how I look. That's my approach, and that is what brings me comfort. That in
Yeah.
everything that I do, you know, I might not take them all with me, but I'm going to take pieces of them with
Mhm.
me, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just the perspective that I wanted to bring to this too, is just, yeah, it just, and
Mm.
also kind of echo what you were saying, is just the relationship
Yeah.
changes, and it gets to change, and we
Yeah.
don't have to fear that letting go is completely, well, then we have no grasp. We get to open up space for a new relationship that gets to develop from this experience too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And do you feel judged when you have those moments of forgetting an anniversary, or feeling a little freer from the grip that grief had on you?
No, I don't think so.
Have
I
you
think
experienced?
partly
No?
because I
Mm.
don't ever tell people. I'm not gonna lie. I've never
Oh,
told
okay.
anyone to. But it's just
Yeah.
it's interesting, right? I think with social media, we've gotten to a
Mm.
place where, when an anniversary comes up or when a birthday comes up,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, we got to post, we got to share, we got to post. And I think
Right.
I've just really let go of that feeling and that need to do that, and actually just
Nice.
just be able to just honor them on that day, even though it's happening every single day and some days more than other. But there's just not this
Yeah.
need to
Yes.
do that anymore.
Yeah.
And there's just no judgment on that, on people who do that, because it's part of everybody else's process and journey. But I think we all come to this space too, right? We all come to it looks so differently. It's just so interesting. And I'm glad we kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
It's going to continue to look differently every single year. Days that go by, it's going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Sean and I used to take the day off
Yeah.
on her birthday and on the anniversary. And then I remember one year it was just like, I think I'm going to go to school. I said, yeah, I think I'm going to go to work. And
Yeah.
it's like, and then we just started like just having a day. It's like we didn't have to do anything special on those days. So it just, again, another process. Yeah.
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 Oh my gosh. Well, I so appreciate you and this conversation and being able to just unpack it a little bit, even though I feel like there's so many more layers that we could dive into around grief. But I also want to give you an opportunity to, I know you kind of touched on the groups that you lead and and what you facilitate, but if you want to share more about other work that, or if you have things going on that you feel called to share.
Oh, sure. Well, people are welcome to visit the website. It's adaptdna.com, and there's a free download on there, 7 Stepping Stones to Reclaiming Your Life After Loss. Not everybody is ready to work with somebody on their grief and might want to just tackle it independently or quietly or privately on their own. It's a perfect little guide to, open up your start to your grief journey. And there's blogs and articles and podcasts and whatnot, lots of free resources on the website. Or there's a calendar there if you want to book a call. I have a little survey as well, Discover Your Grief Style. Because we were talking about people grieving in such different ways, and sometimes it's helpful to know what your grief style is so that you can get some tips from me on how to navigate your particular grief style. So I'm happy to have you visit the website, or you can I'm on all the social media links, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. My son got me on TikTok,
Wow.
Facebook. He's like, Mom, you got to get on TikTok. So I can certainly give you my links to, for people to connect with me.
Amazing. And I love that you mentioned too. I think that's such a beautiful piece around, having the different styles out there too, right? Like we have our own styles, and then everybody in our lives are going to have their own different styles. And it also just brings this ability to be able to see each other as well in our own grief and be able to offer a little bit of understanding on that front too, that and no judgment, and being able to, this is my style and this is how you can support me, and this is your style and how can I support you.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. There needs to be more room for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me, for diving in with me today. I so appreciate you, and literally in so many ways, I so appreciate you being here and sharing your story, sharing Rachel's journey and her story. And I'm just sending you so much love. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Ashley. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to leave a review and continue the conversation with me over on social media. And we'll see you in the next episode.